Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Black Girl Iowa podcast. I'm your host, Emily, and whew, this last week, these last 96 hours, maybe that's where it is, because I am recording this on Saturday, November 9th. Um, this was hard, y'all. As you guys know, this past um this past Tuesday was election day, and unfortunately, our good sis, Vice President Kamala Harris, lost her presidential bid. Um, this week has not been easy, I don't think, for anyone that wanted to see real progressive change, and that proverbial glass ceiling finally shattered for the office of president. It is incredibly sad and sombering to know that our good sis didn't get there. But I think over these last couple of days, I have gone through every emotion possible. And I have also been able to take some time and reflect and really think about what I want the next 4 years of my life to look like. But also, in addition, what the next 4 years is going to look like for everybody. Um, and I think the great thing about this podcast and about some of the things that I have done to really set myself up for success, even though it kind of doesn't feel like it sometimes, is I have interviews that are already created. And so when I was thinking about what to put out this week, my initial thought was, I'm going to go ahead and do a reaction to the election. But then I thought about some of the episodes that I have most recently done and how I can tie in this episode. And if you've been on social media, you have noticed that there have been a wave of Black content creators, male and female, that have said, you know what, we're taking a break. We are taking a break from fighting for causes for other people in this country when really at the end of the day, when we need them to show up for us, they don't do it. I'm telling you guys right now, I am a firm believer that Project 2025 is real. I am a firm believer that more of the more laws and regulations are going to be put on the bodies of women. And, you know, for me working in higher ed and having to go to high schools and talk to young people, talk to young women and seeing them be excited about their futures and going to college and studying to become nurses and doctors and engineers and teachers and all these different amazing things. That first high school visit that I had the day after the election, I cried like a baby in my car because I know that the future isn't as bright for them as it was for me when I was growing up. So, what I did this week was I went into my bank of pre recorded interviews, and I really wanted to do an episode this week that is going to really relate to the two previous episodes to this one. Last week, we talked with Councilwoman Renee Hardman, the first Black woman to have a city council seat for the city of West Des Moines. And then before that, we talked about journaling. And this episode is really going to be focused on a big topic that I have on this show, which is centering and prioritizing the mental health of Black women. So I'm going to run the interview with this amazing woman. And then I'm going to come back at the end and not only give my takeaways from the episode, but after thinking about those two episodes plus this one here, some things that I'm going to be doing over the next 4 years as I join the efforts to take a collective break and focus on myself. So I'm going to stop talking, run the interview, and then I will be back at the end for final thoughts. All right, everyone. So at this time, I'd like to introduce my guest. She is born and raised in Bronx, New York. And if you're wondering what her connection is to Iowa, it's me. My cousin, Dr. Jasmine Ross, is someone that I have always admired and looked up to. She is a licensed psychologist and the founder of Essence Psychological Health Services, PLLC, in Houston, Texas. She has been in practice for over 10 years and has experience in many diverse environments, including prisons, psychiatric hospitals, community mental health centers, outpatient programs, and private practices. According to her website, she is committed to the well-being of women, a theme that is central to both my clinical practice and research. I have consistently provided services that are culturally sensitive and specifically tailored to the unique psychological needs of women. My cousin is a dedicated student and scholar, and her academic achievements include a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from Union College, a master's in counseling from State University of New York, University at Albany, and a doctorate degree in counseling psychology from the University of Houston. She is renowned in her faith and a devoted daughter, sister, friend, cousin, and mother. And I am so excited to have her here. So, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary friends, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jasmine Ross to the show. Dr. Ross, Jasmine, cousin, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that beautiful
Yeah. I mean, you know, I all of my very, very close friends know I have I have family on the East Coast. My dad is from there. My dad, your mom, brother, and sister. And people are always wondering kind of like what my connection is to the East Coast. And I tell people, I was like, yo, like I used to go there for the whole summer when I was a kid and spend time with my grandparents and my cousins and things like that. And so the first thing I want to ask is kind of twofold. First, I want you to tell me a little bit about your experience growing up in the Bronx. What was that like being, a Black girl in the Bronx and just kind of in that, five boroughs, New York atmosphere?
Yeah. That's such an interesting question, and I'm always asked that question whenever I talk to people that did not grow up in New York. And it's
Mm.
hard to describe the experience without first describing what it's like to be a New Yorker. I think New Yorkers are very New York centric. So for us, New York is the center of the
Mhm.
universe. So when you ask a New Yorker what it's like to grow up in New York, they're like, what you mean what it's like to grow up in New York? Like, it's New York, right? And so with that,
Right.
there's this rich, diverse culture. There is this way of being that is very fast, but it exposes you to so much
Mhm.
that for me, I think personally, it prepared me to live anywhere and do anything and feel like I got this. Right. But I think it wasn't until I
Mhm.
left New York that I really started to appreciate how my upbringing was very unique from many other people. But I would say grow up in the
Mhm.
Bronx was just growing up in the Bronx, right? So um, it was fast paced. It was very diverse. There was the opportunity to just get around really quickly due to mass transit. So many of the features of the city
Mhm.
itself shaped the way that I grew up. But because it's all, for
Mhm.
anybody, your upbringing is very relative. So if that's all you know, that's all you
Mhm.
know, and you know something different. And one of the things that I
Right.
appreciated, and that I didn't even realize it at the time, but this one of the things that I really appreciated about you and Nikki coming up every year was that it challenged me to think about, oh,
Mhm.
wait, there's some place other than New York, right? So I had these cousins that were always coming from Iowa. And like, to be honest and frank, I had no idea what it meant to be from Iowa other than
Mhm.
the fact that my cousins come from Iowa, right? So when I
Mhm.
think about Iowa, the first thought that I have is of you guys, is of your
Mm.
family being from Iowa, because again, being from New York and in my younger years, not having traveled many places other than like down south for family reunions, the idea is that
Right.
the only place that exists is New York until something or someone else comes into your sphere to let you know that there's some other
Mhm.
place or way of being.
Right. And, I think what you touched on, the outside, right? Kind of like, so New York was basically like your center of gravity. And it
Mhm.
wasn't until someone else came in, it's like, wait, oh, there's this other place. Oh, there's definitely this place. And I think for me, and if you guys are wondering who Nikki is, that is my sister Olivia. That was her childhood nickname. And it's funny because you guys all call her Nikki, even like my mom's family. I only ever call her Olivia. I never got on to calling her by her nickname. I don't know why, but that 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 is something that I think I crack up about every once in a while. But getting back to the point though, being from Iowa, and I just remember, like, as a kid, it was just like, "Okay, I know there has to be something else, like, what else is
Mhm.
out there?" Because, like, this little itty bitty state that's, planted right in the middle of the United States, like, there has to be more, and so, I think for me and my sister, well, I'm gonna speak for me specifically, going to New York was gonna be an adventure because
Sure.
I knew, first of all, I was never gonna run into somebody that I knew. Second of all, I knew it was gonna be an experience and I was gonna be able to brag about it to my friends when I came back, So it's like, I'm like, "Where are you all summer?" "Oh, I was in the Bronx with my cousins." Like, I don't vacation. I don't do summer in Iowa, you know? And I think the other thing that I really enjoyed was the fact that, kinda like what you already said, there was always something to do. I
Mhm.
never remember a day where it was like, we wake up at grandma and grandpa's and there's nothing going on. I remember sleepovers at your house. I remember sleepovers
Mhm.
at Aunt Jackie's and going to Jersey and staying with Aunt Terry. Like, I remember all of that. And I never remember there being a day where I woke up and I was bored.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that that is a unique feature of New York City. I think even if you woke up at grandma and grandpa's house and we stayed in the house, there were things going on
mhm,
because there's the constant noise, right? There's stuff going on. There's
yes.
the Ice Mr. Softy truck, or like there's so much things
Yeah.
happening in the city because it is such a vibrant city that I think it
hmm
definitely makes sense that you felt that there was always something going on. And there is.
Exactly. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and here in Iowa, it is definitely a slower pace of life. So,
Mm-hmm.
in my teen years when I stopped coming and I was here because I was working and things like that, yeah, there were days I would be bored, but it just, again, it never really matched. So, a question that I've always wanted to ask, is, you had already said, you getting kind of a better sense of where people are from and their experiences as we would come. I always wanted to ask you, when school is out and you go to grandma and grandpa's, which their home was basically a community center. Like, that was just the meeting point for
Correct.
everyone. Um, w- what was it like for you when you would hear, "Oh, you know what? Emmy and Nikki are coming for the summer." Like, what was that like for you to have your cousins come for the summer? And then what are some things that really stood out about us being there for those summers that we would spend in New York?
Yeah, when I think about that, when I was younger, when I would hear that you guys were coming, I was like, "Oh, it's the annual visit. It's annual visit time,"
Yeah.
right? But it wasn't until, I got to be older when I was a teenager, and you
hmm
guys would come and Nikki would come. It was just the eagerness to absorb all of the experiences that we had the opportunity
hmm
to expose you guys to. So Nikki
hmm
would wanna go to all of the things, all of our teen activities, when we would go sneak out and hang out with
Yeah.
boys, like, she would wanna be there with us. She wanted to
I didn't
soak up.
hear that.
But it was just this eagerness and this excitement to soak up an experience that was so different. And I think for
hmm
us, especially as teenagers, it was just the opportunity to expose you guys to the things that were just normal for us, but were also fun parts of being in the
hmm
city in the summer.
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause I think one of the number one things I remember, definitely the softy truck. I mean, you would have to do, like, a dead sprint to catch up, and I remember that, but I also remember specifically music being, like, a
Mm.
really big thing because I feel like back then, and I'm gonna date us right now, which is fine. I feel like back then, music didn't travel as fast as it does now. Now an album drops, it's on Spotify, Apple, it's on all the streaming services, anywhere in the world you can get that piece of music, right? But
True.
I feel like for the music that was coming out in New York, I felt like it would take another 6 to 12 weeks to come out in the Midwest,
Oh, yeah.
and, you guys had, what is it, WBLS, right? You guys
Mhm.
had like all these different hip hop and rap stations.
Right,
We did
97.
not have that here. So
Wow.
our exposure was whatever we could grasp on MTV or VH1. And I
Mhm.
specifically remember being at your house and I had heard Summertime by Will Smith and DJ Jazzy Jeff for the
Mhm.
first time.
Uh-huh.
And I had to have been 6 or 7 years old. I was not that old. But I just remember there was like a little cassette, I think it was pink, and, we were listening to the radio and the window was open and like I don't know why, but like that to me is like the definition of my summers in New York with you
Yeah.
guys was
Mhm.
having those moments, listening to music, chasing after the ice cream truck, going to church, all of those things. And so I really love how you said that you guys were excited and eager to share those experiences with us because we were
Mhm.
so excited and eager to experience.
Correct.
I remember my dad, that was a 26-hour car ride to come and visit you guys for the
Well, you
summer.
that's oh god, I'm so glad that you brought that up. You guys always
Uh-huh.
drove, and I'm like 26
Always
hours, but y'all would just hit the road and, like,
26
do
hours.
it.
And it wasn't like, my dad would be like, okay, yeah, you guys got 2 weeks at home. No, 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 no. School is out on Wednesday. We are in the car Saturday morning. And
Wow.
my dad was, we're gonna go. And we're driving. We are stopping. I knew where we would stop. And yeah, that was it. I think we only flew to New York together, me and my sister once in the
Um,
whole time that we would come up. But yeah, I just remember that 26-hour drive. And then I remember every time we would finally hit the Cross Bronx Expressway. That's how I knew. We're gonna be there in 10 minutes depending on
yeah.
traffic.
So, did you ever
Yeah.
stop, or was it just, like, a straight shot?
Larry Johnson is a straight shot driver.
Wow.
Um I think it's funny because when they drove last year for Grandpa's funeral,
Mhm.
they stopped and got a hotel for a night.
Mhm.
And I remember I didn't find that out until I got to New York
Mhm.
a week later because they got up there a week prior. And
Well,
my dad was like, "Yeah, we stopped in, I think they stopped like somewhere in Pennsylvania and had a really nice night, got a good night's sleep." I said, "Now wait a minute. Now all them years that we drove, I remember sleeping at truck stops. So all of a sudden we got hotel money? Like, that's fine. Just that's okay. I get it. You're older. It's fine. But having three people, because my mom would always stay behind, but having three people try and get sleep in a car when your dad snores like a buzzsaw, eh, no, it doesn't work like that. No, Larry Johnson, straight shot, stop for maybe 4 hours
oh,
twice.
oh,
But other than that, he's trucking. Yep.
that's amazing, and I wonder what that's like for you just to reflect upon the fact that you guys had this routine, this tradition of the 26-hour
Hmm.
drive to push to be with family, to have these experiences with this vibrant city, like, how do you think that
Hmm.
that's contributed to your overall development and who you are as a person?
Well, I honestly think that with spending those summers in New York and then like even like when we would go down south for the family reunions, which we would always for everyone listening, we would always go down to South Carolina because that's
Mhm.
where the majority of the Johnson family is from. Um, so I honestly think it's really what made me fearless in two ways. I am
Mhm.
not afraid to jump in the car and go somewhere, but also I'm not afraid to live anywhere. I've lived in Wisconsin, I lived in Wyoming, I lived in Arizona. I don't even think that Iowa is going to be my last stop. So I have no problem jumping in the car and going somewhere or oh, the opportunity is over here. Okay, cool. It looks like I'm moving there. I really felt like kind of like what you said for you to kind of get that understanding that there's more outside of New York. Me
Mhm.
going to New York was a reminder that Iowa isn't the only place that you're ever going to live or that you're ever going to have opportunities in.
Mhm.
And it even now, like I remember, I went up and saw Brian and our cousin. So our cousin Brian lives in Minneapolis, so he's about 4 hours away. And I jumped in the car and I was like, Brian, I'm coming to see you. Drove up. And, we're driving around and stuff, and he was just like, "Why are you so comfortable driving in the city?" I was like, "Man, I could drive anywhere. Like, I've driven in New York. I could drive anywhere. It's no problem." And I honestly think all of those experiences is probably why. Is probably why.
Mhm.
So, I love reminiscing about our childhood, but reading your bio and also watching your content and things like that,
Mhm.
um, I think it's just so fascinating now that we're adults,
Mhm.
seeing what everyone in the family is kind of into and what they're doing, and watching your journey of becoming a doctor and really getting into psychology and understanding not only how people work, but why they do the things they do, and then focusing on women's mental health. I think it's so fascinating. So, can you take me back to that moment where pre-Dr. Jasmine Ross, when it was just Jasmine Ross, and when was that moment where you're like, "This is what I want to do"? Talk to me about what sparked your passion in psychology.
Yeah, it was really what the hell is going on? Right? And it came from my growing up right, growing up in the South Bronx, right? And you see so
Mhm,
much. And a lot of what I would
mhm,
see and what I was curious about was people struggling with their mental health. I can recall a time growing up in the city where someone that was going through what I understand now to be a mental health crisis, but was attempting to either jump off of a roof or jump out of a window of a 20-story building. And I was just
mm,
like, what's happening here? Why is this happening? What are the factors that contribute to this person making this decision to do this thing? And just growing up and there being multiple instances of seeing, a lot of substance abuse, a lot of trauma and all of those things, just being really curious about that. And talking to my
mhm,
mom and asking her, like, why do people do that? And what's making them doing that? Why do they think about that? And my mom, who is a social worker by trade, said, you know what? That sounds like you're interested in psychology. And she was
mhm,
the one that planted the seed, just in listening to the questions that I was having at the time and just helping me to start to make sense out of that. And so she told me
mhm,
that at a very young age. And so there's really only two things that I've ever wanted to do in my life. First, at 5, I thought I was going to be a firefighter because there was a fire station right down the block from the
yeah,
house. You had to, right?
mhm,
And then there
makes
was a,
sense.
yeah. And then the second thing was a
Mhm,
psychologist. And so it was something that I stuck with because it's been really just fascinating for me to ask questions about why people do the things they do. What are the things that motivate them to do the things
mhm,
that they do? But also, when we think about people that are struggling and we think about trauma, what are the factors that contribute to different people from different backgrounds and walks of life to experience those things differently or to be more susceptible to have those experiences? And also, what are the factors that contribute to their healing? So,
mhm,
to answer your question, the thing that got me into psychology was just the curiosity about the things that I was seeing growing up in the South Bronx. But the thing
mhm,
that really kept me going was really starting to ask more targeted questions about why people from specific backgrounds, specific groups, why do they experience the things that they experience and what things need to change for them to heal from those
mhm.
experiences. And
Okay.
so with that, I went to college and I majored in psychology and loved it. But I found that
Mhm,
psychology was lacking some of those pieces, those cultural pieces. So I minored in sociology and Africana studies to just round out the cultural piece of my understanding of psychology.
mhm,
And as it relates to women, we thankfully have a family that is very well rounded in that we have men that are very present in our family,
mhm,
and women are just the backbone and the foundation of our family as
mhm.
well. And so I've always been
Right.
curious in particular about, okay, women's experiences. And so, as I advanced in my studies and started to do more clinical work, I focused my work on women in particular. And so, in all of the settings that I've been able to work in, I've been blessed to be able to focus that work on women.
Mhm. You really touched on something that I feel like in our family, it it's almost like once you get kind of that little nugget, that like first interest, you
Mhm.
want to keep doing it. With you just seeing all of these things happening and saying, "Well, why is this happening?" I want to understand more than the why. I want to understand how it all connects in the brain and how it all connects to trauma and your background and your
Mhm.
childhood and all these other things. I know for myself with journalism, granted, I did not go into the field after college, but even in meetings in every work setting that I had, I am that person that is asking the question at the end of the meeting because I need complete clarification on what you said and how it's going to impact X, Y, and Z.
Wow.
So I I also think though that with psychology specifically, it almost seems like as you start learning and understanding simultaneously, your own journey is kind of starting with, you going to school, getting your degrees, all while that is all happening and you're learning, you are also going through life. So
Yeah.
how has your course of study assisted you and opened up for you to start your own journey with prioritizing your mental health?
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right in that as you're getting immersed in something, life is happening simultaneously. And
Mhm.
for me, at the point that I completed my doctoral degree, life came at me really hard and really fast.
Mm.
And so the
Mhm.
interesting thing that was happening for me, so I got married, I got pregnant, and then I had stillbirth. I got pregnant again, and then I
Mm.
had another stillbirth. I had a high risk
Mhm.
pregnancy and a traumatic delivery, and then I had a divorce. Right. So a
Mhm.
lot of life was happening, and
Mhm.
simultaneously, I was serving women who were experiencing life simultaneously too. So very
Mhm.
quickly, I had to process through my stuff as I was doing the work. And
Mhm.
so the thing that it did for me, it was one of, I have to say by far, it happened over a span of about 12 years, the hardest years of my life,
Mhm.
absolutely. But by far, I
Mhm.
have to say that I did some of the best work possible because it helped to ground me and center me and connect me to the people that I was serving in a way that I might not have been
Mhm.
able to if I had not had the experiences that I had. But so many
Mhm.
times I would say, God, like, why is this happening? Why am I going through this? And then literally a week, a month, 2 months later, I'd be sitting across from a woman that was having a similar experience, and I could be able to sit there and really feel and understand what she was going through.
Mhm.
But it was so necessary and important that I be doing my own work at the same time so that as I'm supporting
Mhm.
her, I'm not projecting my stuff onto her. Because although we may have had
Right.
similar experiences, because we're different people, we're not having the same experience. So,
Mhm.
yeah, life was happening as I was developing as a professional. But
Mhm.
after having gone through that and gotten to a place in my healing where I am now, I wouldn't change any of it.
Mhm.
Again, the hardest
Mm.
12 years of my life, but again, I would not
Yeah.
change any of it because it made me a better person. It made me a better mother, but it also made me a better
Mhm.
psychologist.
Right. Right. And I feel like too, just with the experiences that you've talked about, they are incredibly traumatic and they do um shape the life that you're going to essentially live moving forward. But from what
Mhm.
it really sounds like, as you're making that connection to being a psychologist, it's kind of helping you develop empathy and how to show that, and then just like what you said, but not project. And I also think too, every therapist has a therapist. No one should have to go through all of these life experiences completely solo just because of a title that they might hold. And it must just be such a good feeling to come on the other side, but not have resentment for what happened. And I know for me and my divorce, that's really where I am right now because I'm 2 years out of my divorce. It'll be 2 years in October that everything was final. And when I look at everything that I went through for the last 24 months, um, I look at the person that I was and then I look at the person that I am now, and I'm starting to kind of realize that everything that I've been doing in the meantime has all been a part of that
Mhm.
healing journey, and that process. So speaking though about your healing journey, the one thing, and I had my friend Brianne Ward, she's a licensed mental health counselor here in the Des Moines area, and I really talked with her about kind of going on your same journey. Um,
Mhm.
but I think the one thing that I really want to ask you in particular is for someone that's wanting to start their journey,
Mhm.
kind of the differences in going to a licensed mental therapist, mental counselor versus
Sure.
a psychologist. Can you kind of talk a little bit about the difference between the two?
Sure. So let me just say, so we can talk about the difference from the perspective of the client, the person receiving the services, and then the difference from the perspective of the professional. So for the
Mhm,
client, and there's a lot of research that backs this, it really doesn't matter the credentials that the individual has, as long as the person
right,
feels the empathy, feels the support, and feels like the person is
mhm,
understanding. So for the
mhm,
clients, I would say as long as the person is licensed and they have credible training, then their experience is
mhm,
likely good. Now, in terms
mhm,
of the professionals themselves, the major difference between a licensed mental health counselor and a psychologist is the amount of time that we spend in school. So
mhm,
typically, a licensed clinician will go to school for about 2 years or so to obtain a master's degree, whereas a
mhm,
psychologist will attend school for 5 to sometimes 8 years, depending upon the program that they're in. And so for a psychologist, they will have clinical training, much like a master's level professional, and will
okay,
also have extensive training in research. So for
mhm,
me, I'm a scientist and a researcher. So I have that research backing that's going to support the work that I do. So
mhm,
for me, I did obtain my master's degree, but I wanted more because I am an options person. I want to have all of the options available to me, even if I'm not going to use them.
mhm,
Just give me all of it. Right. And so for
yeah,
me to get all of the options in the field of psychology, it required me to get my doctoral degree. So with it, I got the solid clinical training. I got the research training. I also got exposure to psychological assessment to be able to assess someone to make some determinations about how they're functioning both psychologically and neuropsychologically to be able to answer
mhm,
some questions that can help then guide the clinical work that I'm doing. So it's just going to
mhm,
be the amount of time that you spend in school, which can directly impact the amount of student loans you end up taking if you aren't able to finish
yep,
education, right?
yes,
And then the exposure to different parts of the field of psychology. So that's going to be
mhm,
the biggest difference. Now, in terms of licensed mental health clinicians, there are a number of ways that you can do that. You can get a psychology degree, a counseling degree, a social work degree, marriage and family therapist degree. So there are a number of different options. And on the doctoral level, you can get a PhD, which I have, which is a doctor of philosophy in counseling psychology.
mhm,
You can also get what is called a PsyD, which is a doctor of psychology. And with the PsyD, there is going to be some exposure to research, but not as much as you would get with a PhD. So the difference in
mhm,
terms of the training of the professionals is going to be about the amount of time that they spend in school and the exposure to different areas of psychology. But from the
mhm,
part of the client, as long as the person that is sitting across from you is someone that is trained and skilled in what they're doing, but ultimately as long as they show up as someone that is non-judgmental, empathic, caring, and understanding, then
mhm.
you can have a positive experience.
I feel like that's the perfect definition of the difference between the two because at the end of the day, Brienne said the same thing is that you want to make sure that whomever it is you're getting someone that you have a connection with and
Mm.
someone that you definitely trust and someone that's providing a safe space, which I think is critical. I was really lucky to be able to find a really great therapist here. I feel like when I go to her, I'm not talking to a therapist, to a licensed mental health counselor. I'm literally talking to a friend. That's how it feels for me,
Yeah.
which I think is really important. Just because we've literally had conversations, and then I'll say something, and I'll be like, "Wait, was that trauma?" She was like, "Yeah, girl, that was trauma." Okay, all right, well, write that one down to work that one out. So, the other thing that I want to talk about real quick because I feel like, first of all, I already know I'm going to have you back on another episode because you've talked about so far growing up in the Bronx, going through school, starting your mental health journey, and just there are so many layers. Then we also add to it um, an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
With your business, Essence Psychological Health Services, what drove you to go from, working in these other diverse environments to saying, I want to go into business as a professional so I can help people in the way that I think will be beneficial?
Yeah, I think it was two things primarily. First thing is that I've never been good at having people tell me what to do. Like that's just never been.
That's a
Oh,
family trait.
yeah. I
That's
I
a family
try,
trait.
but
Yeah. Yep.
I've never been
Yep.
really good at that. And
Hmm.
the other thing is that again, with me choosing to go the PhD route because I wanted to have all of the options available to me, and that
Hmm.
required me to go to school for a really long time. and to
Mhm.
accumulate a lot of student loan debt. But I did it because I wanted to have options and I also wanted to serve people that looked like me in a way that made
Mhm.
sense and a way that worked for them. So going
Mhm.
into so many different systems where I had to deal with bureaucracy, I had to deal with people telling me what to do, and then they were telling me how to serve the people that I wanted to serve. It just didn't work for me. It just didn't.
Yeah.
And so I said, I've gone to school for this long to be able to serve in a way that feels right to me. It's not happening in these systems.
Mhm.
And so I tried. I went from system to see if I could fit. And I love the work with the populations. My clients love that. In the prisons, I loved it. Hospital,
Mhm.
I really loved doing the work with folks, but I did not like the systems that were telling me how to do that work. And so
Right.
one of the things that I appreciated in my doctoral training was I trained in private practices. And so I saw and I appreciated how the psychologists in those settings were doing it their way. And so I would take notes. I
Mhm.
say, okay, I would definitely do that. I would never do that. But, if
Right.
I ever decided to start my own practice, that's how I would do it. And so once I
Mhm.
went through all of the systems and I felt exhausted by that, I said, you know what? It's time for me to do my own thing. And that's what I set
Mhm.
out to do. And I said, I want
Mhm.
to have a niche practice. I want to have a practice that serves primarily women.
Mhm.
And my logo is going to be pink because that's how I want to do it. And I dare somebody try to tell me no.
Yes.
And
Yep.
that's what I
Period.
did. Yeah. And, I took a leap.
Yeah.
I really did. I took a leap and I started my own practice and I'll make 10 years in November. So,
That's amazing. That's
yeah, I'm
amazing.
glad that I did it. And I think growing up in New York City just gave me the grit and the gusto to say, I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to
Yeah.
take this leap and do it. And I know I'm going to succeed. And by God's grace, that's what happened for me.
Mhm. Yeah, and I really love and for I've had a lot of conversations with entrepreneurs. And it's the audacity that y'all have to be like, "What? Imma just bet on myself, and Imma let go and let God, and I'm gonna do what it is that I want to do." I find that incredibly inspiring, and I feel like you can find a million reasons not to do something, and there were definitely a million reasons, I'm sure, for you to not open your practice. There were a million reasons for me not to start this podcast, but there was definitely one reason, and that was us to to start these things. So, about your practice, you said that you wanted something unique and niche that supports women. So, for you being in Houston, what sets your practice aside from everyone else's? What is that piece that makes it unique?
I think the biggest part is for me saying, I serve primarily women. And in terms of my marketing and my messaging, I am centering women of color. That is extremely
Hmm.
unique. I remember
Hmm.
when I was launching the website and the web developer, she put up some stock photos and I'm just like, we need more Black women. She was like, no,
Yeah.
you're not going to get people. I said, you know what? As a matter of fact, I want only Black women. Only Black
Period.
women, Latinx women. That's what I want because
Right.
the pushback is telling me, no, we need more of this. I wanted it to be a safe space, an audacious space for women of
Hmm.
color to show up and say, I see me in this space. And
Hmm.
because so much of my emphasis is around women's experience of trauma, and so many of the women that I serve have experienced trauma that have involved men, that's why it was really important
Mm.
for me to say, no, this is a safe space where you don't have to worry about
Right.
being confronted by a man in a waiting area, because that is very
Hmm.
triggersome for some people. Now, I
Right.
do occasionally see men, but I'm very thoughtful and strategic about when and how that I'm going to schedule them on a
Hmm.
certain time. Like it might have all men days, right? It's
Hmm.
going to be really intentional about when and how I see those men. And most
Right.
often, men are coming through connection to one of my women clients. So it might be a partner, a
Mhm.
child, or what have you. I do have a contract with the city of Houston where I also see men, but they will come on days that are exclusively for them because I'm
Mhm.
honoring that this space is just for women. Another
Right.
unique feature of the practice is that I really do have a specialty in serving women that are experiencing infertility, reproductive trauma, and loss. Having had walked that journey myself, I understand how isolating of an experience it is and how hard it is to find someone that can truly understand what that journey is like. So I made
Mhm.
that a very special part of my practice in which I'm able
Mhm.
to serve those women that are on that walk.
Kudos to you also for really honoring the concept of this is a safe space for women. Women your needs are prioritized, because I feel like that doesn't always happen. It's almost like in some situations, yeah, it's promoted, but just like what you said, it's not the reality. So, and I know how important it is to have representation and be represented, especially living here in Iowa. There are a handful of Black psychologists and mental health counselors that are in our area. And I feel like the more that we talk, the more that we emphasize mental health and taking care of yourself, those professionals are booked and busy. I know you are booked and busy in Houston. Before we end our conversation today, I have a question for you that might be a little introspective. If there's someone listening to this specific episode, whether they are in Houston, New York, here in Iowa, wherever, if they're looking to begin their mental health journey, what advice would you give them that you wish you had when you started on this journey yourself?
Well, I am really big on storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Because stories are all around us, and
Mm-hmm.
stories shape the way that we see ourselves, we see the world, but also the way in which we conceptualize the future that we want to live. And so, to
Mm-hmm.
anyone that is contemplating starting therapy, I would encourage them to try to envision the version of themselves that they would like to be once they're done on their therapy journey.
Mm-hmm.
That's helpful because if you have an idea of who you would like to be, then you can work backwards and figuring out the step that you need to take to get there. So, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, if you're someone that has survived a traumatic experience and you want to see yourself in a place of feeling healed and free enough to take risk again and experience joy, understanding that idea, understanding that vision that you have will help you to say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so I want to feel free. I want to experience joy. That is the goal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what type of therapist might be able to help me get there? What type of setting might get
Mm-hmm.
me there? What other support people
Mm-hmm.
might I need to get there? And so from that space of
Mm-hmm.
knowing where you want to go and asking yourself the questions about how you might get there, then that'll help you in the process of doing your research. There are a number of
Yeah.
places that you can go to do some research. If you are choosing to use insurance to get a therapist, you can go straight to your insurance network and just look at their panel and see what
Mm-hmm.
mental health providers they have. If you're not looking for insurance, and even if you are, there are a number of different directories that are available, like Psychology Today, Psychology for Black girls, Psychology for Latinx. And I'm happy to share with you some of these resources. But there are a number of
Yes,
different
please.
directories
Yeah.
to help try to figure it out. One of the things
Mm-hmm.
that is happening and has been really big since the pandemic is that more and more licensed mental health professionals are on social media. So really all you have to
Mm-hmm.
search counselors, therapists, providers, and then you can start to get to know different therapists in terms of the personality that they are projecting on social media. And that's a way to start to get a
Yeah.
sense of the type of therapist or the type of therapy that you might be interested in engaging in. But again, it starts with
Mm-hmm.
you asking yourself where you would like to be. And I think
Right.
walking yourself backwards from that point can be a good way to get started.
That's a piece I wish I would have had 15 years ago when I started my journey. And that I feel like a lot of, like, especially like when I first started going, all those years ago, and even when I first started going when I moved back to Iowa in 2018, I knew there was a problem,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't know how to fix it. And I felt like my problem was it's 2018, so I was 30, it's like 34, maybe. Yeah, I think I was 34, 33, 34 years old. And I'm back in Iowa. I'm married. I have a house. I have a really good job. I have all of these things, but I didn't have any goals. I didn't have anything I was working towards. And I just remember kind of being in a panic and just being like, this isn't right. Like, I shouldn't be this age and not be looking forward to anything. Like, that just doesn't make any sense, right? And it took probably about a year and a half for me to start identifying things that I wanted to do. And then when I recognized in 2020 that I didn't want to be married anymore, and then that journey to 2022 where I finally asked for a divorce, it just took a long time. And it was just because I didn't know what kind of person I wanted to be outside of a divorce if it happened.
Mhm.
So I think kind of doing that and tell on yourself, I
Yeah.
probably would have saved a lot of money on therapy.
I say it's one of the things that we do very often is that we look back at our lives and say, I wish I had done this. I wish, but that's a part of your story. You were meant to have that stage of your life where you didn't feel like you
Mm-hmm.
had any goals and you didn't know what might happen beyond that divorce. Because you
Right.
needed that experience, right? For whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason, you may not know yet, but you needed that experience. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I think that stories are so important because we're always telling ourselves a story. We're telling ourselves a story about who we are, what we're capable of, what will happen next. But as the
Mm-hmm.
author of your story, one, you always have the right to make yourself the main character because you are.
Yes.
And you always have the
Yes.
right to set yourself up to win as you are crafting that
Mm-hmm.
narrative. So right now, you're in the
Mm-hmm.
process of writing your story, 2 years post-divorce, launching your podcast, doing all of these things. And you can say, you know
Yes.
what? I'm gonna write this story to which I have an award-winning podcast, the top podcast on
Yeah.
Spotify and Apple, da da da.
Right.
Because this is your story that you are actively creating. But it often
Mm-hmm.
requires you to reject the old story
Mm-hmm.
in favor of crafting a new one. But that is something
Right.
that you can always do at any point.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that.
Mhm.
Dr. Ross, Jasmine, I heart you so much. I
Sure.
do. I'm really happy that we've been able to reconnect via social media and just cheer each other on from where we
Absolutely.
are respectively with your
Mm.
practice and then with this podcast. So before we let you go though, I want to make sure that everyone knows where they can find you. So I want to roll out the red carpet. Where can people find Dr. Jasmine Ross on social media, on the internet, all of those things?
Yeah. So if you are interested in working with me as a client, you can check me out on my website, epsychealth.com, or on social media at epsychealth. That's EPSYCHHEALTH. If you're interested in me in terms of the consulting work that I'm doing around storytelling and shifting some of the stories that are coming out around women in the media and entertainment industry, you can follow me at Jasmine Ross on all social media.
Okay. Yes, and I will have all of that in the show notes for everyone. And again, Jasmine, thank you so much for being here. I I already I already know of like probably two other episodes that I'm gonna have you come back for. But,
Absolutely.
I just think that this conversation was incredibly helpful as I want to make sure that with this podcast that we are centering mental health, taking care
Mhm.
of yourself is very important. And there
Mhm.
are people that will definitely help you get to the place where you want to be. So thank you so much for being here.
I was just going to say thank you so much for having me and thank you so much for this podcast. I think that what you're doing is phenomenal. And I think it's powerful in that you are dispelling some of the myths and ideas that people might have about Iowa itself and about the Black experience in Iowa. So thank you so much because it's really impactful.
Thank you, cousin. I
You're welcome.
appreciate that. Yes, yes. So, all right, y'all. So, we're going to go ahead and take a break. I will come back with final thoughts and a teaser into next week's episode. So, I'll be right back. All right. Big thank you to Dr. Jasmine Ross, my cousin, out of Houston, Texas. And I will be sure to have all of her information linked in the show notes. Before I get into my takeaways, I do want to mention one thing about the election that has stood out to me the most. I have actually talked about this on my TikTok and on my Instagram and on Facebook and things like that. And I've really been having a lot of discourse with people to really give that understanding as to why even I feel like Black people, our needs were not, no one's fighting for us, basically. And when we look at the election, and we know that Project 2025 is real, and we also know that concepts of a plan mean implementation of Project 2025. With us knowing that and knowing what we know now, I want to just highlight a couple of things. So, I want to highlight the fact that 59% of white men voted Republican this year, 52% of white women. voted Republican. 54% of Latino men voted Republican. 37% of Latino women voted Republican. And of all other combined races in this nation, it says here 45% voted Republican. Now, 20% of the Black men that voted Republican, and 7% of Black women voted Republican. I do want to highlight 92% of Black women and 78% of Black men voted for Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, we can absolutely have a conversation about all of the things that the Democratic Party did wrong. But I'm not going to do that today because at the end of the day, Vice President Harris and Governor Tim Walz had 109 days to make a name for themselves, to have a platform, and to develop policy that would have taken our country into the future. Okay? So that is not a conversation we are having on this podcast today. But when I think about the conversation with Dr. Ross, when I think about the two previous episodes that we had in journaling and then also about finding your voice and making a difference, one of my biggest takeaways from just these three episodes and then the election is the need to prioritize yourself. When I say prioritize yourself, I'm not saying I'm only going to think about me and I'm not going to think about anybody else. But I do think that to a certain extent, one of the reasons why Black people in general in this country feel so tired is because we are consistently asked to speak on movements and do things that essentially deprioritize our needs and prioritize the needs of others. And I think that as I was listening back to this interview with Dr. Ross and thinking about the election and all of those other things, I came to the realization and the reminder of why I decided to do this podcast in the first place. And the whole point was to center the stories of Black women and their connections to the state of Iowa through their experiences, to showcase their success and to also highlight some of the things that we have had to go through in a state that wants to promote Iowa nice, but sometimes it ain't so nice here. And I really think that over the next 4 years, it is going to be my job to continue to elevate those stories. But I also think, too, something that Dr. Ross said is ensuring that you are always looking at the person that you want to be. And if you are deciding to go through a mental health journey, understanding that if you want to be a certain type of person, what work you're going to do to get there. One thing that she did mention is reminding yourself that you are the main character in your story. Give that main character energy to yourself as you are actively creating that story. That was really important. As I said on during the interview, it took me 2 years to really understand and identify the woman that I wanted to be outside of being Mrs. Somebody else. Um, and as I kind of think about the next 4 years, I think about where I want to be in 4 years and how I'm going to start writing that story and creating that narrative for myself to make those things actually happen for myself. A couple other things that really stood out in this conversation. As we said in the beginning, Dr. Ross is my cousin. And really remembering those memories of me going to New York as a kid, hanging out with all my cousins and doing things like running down the softy truck and listening to music and being outside and having conversations and knowing that there's a big world out there outside of Des Moines, Iowa was huge for me. And that's something that I definitely want to continue to remember. And thinking back to remembering that fearless girl that had no problem jumping in the car and just going somewhere, I still have that in me. And over the next 4 years, that's something more that I want to do because the more I do, the more I prioritize myself and my story and my journey, the more I have to share. And the more experiences that I have as a Black woman to write those things and to showcase those things and to just live for myself for once. Okay. That is huge. Um, the other thing, though, that really resonated with me in this conversation is how Dr. Ross had a 12-year span where she went through all the things. And the one thing that she said was, I wouldn't change anything about the things that I went through. And these last 2 years have definitely been difficult for me. I've talked about it on this show. I'm not going to repeat it at this time, but really, understanding that everything I went through and where I am now, I'm on a healing journey. And it's really important for me to keep going, keep healing, keep asking questions, and also understand that there is no anticipated end date for when my healing journey is over. I think one of the things that I really have been doing over these last couple of months is I feel like I've been trying to rush my healing journey. And what's been happening is I've had more days where I don't want to do anything as opposed to days where I actually want to do something. And it's because I don't give myself breaks. And I think that that's how a lot of Black people feel over these last 109 days, over these last 2 years, 4 years, 8 years since the Orange Bandit was the president the first time. When have we collectively been able to take a break? So that's one of the reasons why so many people are like, you know what? I'm standing down. Figure out your movements on your own. I'm going over here and I'm going to focus on myself and prioritize myself and my journey and my mental health. And I really, really think that that's important. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why. Um, Even I'm just tired of screaming loud from the rooftops and not really have anybody there to listen. So overall, the next 4 years are not going to be easy. But this conversation that I had with Dr. Ross, and I'm very excited to have her back because she is launching a documentary project, which I cannot wait to talk to her more about as she goes through this journey. But I think that over the next 4 years, I really encourage Black people, Black men, Black women, collectively take a break. Just take a break. It's okay. Collectively take a break. At the end of the day, I also think it's totally okay if you just want to go to work, come home, stop at Starbucks on the way, get a mocha frap and a piece of lemon loaf and call it a wrap. I really think that for some of us, I don't think that the fight is over, but I do think that prioritizing ourselves and finding a new way to fight, I think is even more important. So I will promise you, though, this podcast is going to be here for the next 4 years. I ain't going nowhere. And again, I want to thank Dr. Jasmine Ross for taking the time and having the conversation with me about her mental health journey, reminiscing about our childhood, and then really helping me understand what I want to do in the next 4 years and how I'm going to move forward. I encourage all of you to think about those things as well. And while you're doing so, please make sure that you are following me on social media. So I have my Instagram at Black Girl Iowa. I'm also on TikTok at Black Girl Iowa. Also, the Black Girl Iowa shop is open and it will be open through the end of the month. So please be sure to check that out on Etsy. I'll have it linked below. But you guys already know I've got hooded sweatshirts, I've got crew necks, t-shirts, notebooks, tote bags. And I would love to send you guys some merch. Have you guys rocking your merch from the different parts of the country that you're in, and really supporting my passion project of this. So this is Black Girl Iowa, Emily signing off. We'll catch you guys on the next one. All right.